The recent Netflix series, Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer Story, was one of the streaming service's biggest surprise hits of all time, featuring the grisly real-life story of Jeffrey Dahmer and the horrible crimes he committed throughout his life. The show offers a dark glimpse into the life of one of America's most notorious serial killers. Dahmer killed 17 boys and men between 1978 and 1991 in and around Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The Netflix series quickly rose to popularity, with its premiere being the second most watched in the streaming platform's history. With the show's popularity, especially with its grisly subject matter, plenty of controversies have arisen surrounding it. That's why we'll be breaking down some of the moments in the show that aren't exactly accurate, as well as providing some insight into key moments in the show. Finally, we'll be looking into the next season of the Monster series and whether or not it will be focusing on the aftermath of the Dahmer case. First, was Dahmer really a cannibal like the show portrayed? As disturbing as it may be to imagine, yes, Jeffrey Dahmer really did consume his victims after killing them. Dahmer confessed to eating many different body parts, including his victims' hearts. In fact, 2 human hearts were found in his refrigerator after his arrest. Because Dahmer was not necessarily open about his cannibalism with police, it's uncertain how many people he ate throughout his life. One of his potential victims, Tracy Edwards, later claimed that he was sure Dahmer intended on eating his heart. Aside from eating his victims, Dahmer also preserved parts of their bodies for other purposes. It's thought that Dahmer was planning on creating an altar made out of his victims' bodies in his apartment. Although he killed 17 people in total, only 11 of his victims' body parts were found in his apartment after his arrest. This information only solidifies the fact that Dahmer was one of the most deeply sick and twisted individuals in all of modern human history. Next, did Dahmer actually feed his neighbor human flesh? One of the most disturbing parts of the entire series takes place in episode 7, Cassandra. It shows Dahmer visiting with his neighbor Glenda and feeding her a sandwich that contains meat taken from the body of one of Dahmer's victims. With this being such an over-the-top disturbing scene, many fans of the show wondered whether or not this ever actually happened. While there isn't any proof of Dahmer feeding human meat to people like his neighbor, it's thought that this was likely. Dahmer's neighbor in real life was a woman named Pamela Bass, who is on record saying that she fully believes she could have been eating people during her visits with Dahmer. She was friendly with the man up until his arrest. Once he was in jail, Bass went on record saying, quote, "I have probably eaten someone's body parts," which is disturbing to imagine, to say the least. Dahmer never confessed to serving his victims to anyone else, but based on his patterns of behavior, it's certainly possible. So did Dahmer's arresting officers really win Officer of the Year? Dahmer eventually gets arrested in episode 9 of the show, The Boogeyman. The episode focuses largely on Dahmer's arresting officers, Joseph T. Gabrish and John A. Balcerzik. These were the same officers who returned 14-year-old Konerik Sinthasomphone to Dahmer and were partially responsible for the boy's death at the hands of the serial killer. In the show, these officers are awarded the title of Officer of the Year after making the arrest. There is no proof of this ever occurring in real life, however. The officers certainly weren't praised for their handling of the case and were actually both suspended when their mishandling of the case was revealed. With that being said, the punishment was not as severe as some would argue it should have been. Both officers were eventually reinstated in 1994. They were certainly not lauded as heroes for their roles in the Dahmer case, but they weren't necessarily punished too harshly either. Next, what happened to Jeffrey Dahmer's brother David? Monster goes in depth into Jeffrey Dahmer and his parents, Joyce and Lionel. With that being said, Dahmer also had a younger brother named David, who was not covered very much in the show. This is because there is very little information about David available to the public. When his brother was arrested, David made the wise choice to remain as anonymous as possible. This kept him out of the eyes of the public and allowed him to live a more peaceful life. After he turned 18, David didn't keep any contact with his brother, which in hindsight was probably the right decision. David reportedly changed his last name so he would not have to live in the shadow of his brother's horrific crimes. Not much is known about the former David Dahmer, but in a 2004 interview with his stepmother, Sherry Dahmer, she did reveal some details about the man. She said that he was living a happy, normal life with a steady job and 2 kids. With all the suffering that Dahmer caused in his life, it's good to hear that he was able to, at least partially, escape the evil of his brother. So, how did Dahmer really die? Dahmer's death scene in the show is one of the most unforgettable moments in the whole series. It got fans wondering if that's how things really went down. Here, we'll be be covering all the details of Dahmer's sentence and his eventual death. After being convicted in 1992, Dahmer was sentenced to 16 life sentences. He was set to serve out life in jail at the Columbia Correctional Institution. Winston did not have the death penalty otherwise. Dahmer would have certainly been executed for his crimes. Dahmer was initially placed in solitary confinement, but was eventually put on cleaning duties with the man who would eventually kill him, Christopher Scarver. When left unsupervised while cleaning the prison's gym bathroom, Scarver would kill both Dahmer and the other man assigned to cleaning duties with them, Jesse Anderson. This murder occurred on November 28, 1994. Scarver would initially claim that God instructed him to carry out the murders. He would later revise his story and say that he strongly disliked Dahmer for his unrepentant attitude towards his crimes and his mockery of other inmates. This ultimately led to Scarver serving 2 additional life sentences on top of the one he was already serving for a previous murder. Moving on, will Monster Season 2 still be focusing on Jeffrey Dahmer? When it was revealed that Monster would be getting a second season, fans were left rightfully confused. How will the show continue telling the story of Dahmer if he's dead? Will the show focus on the fallout of his crimes, examining the lives of those around him? Although this may have made for an interesting second season, showrunners have decided to turn the show into an anthology that will focus on a different serial killer each season. This will make the show similar to another Netflix series, American Crime Story, which also focused on completely unrelated stories in each of its seasons. With this being revealed, the question stands, who will Monster Season 2 be focusing on if not Dahmer? Finally, if not Dahmer, then who will the second season be about? Showrunners have yet to reveal who exactly will be taking Dahmer's place in being the focus of the show's second season. Many have speculated that the series will focus on Ed Gein, commonly referred to as the Plainfield Ghoul. This is probably because Gein is mentioned in season 1 of the show, so viewers would already be somewhat familiar with him. Another killer mentioned in season 1 of the show is John Wayne Gacy, who is one of the only American serial killers to rival the terrible reputation of Dahmer. Netflix has a series on Gacy called Conversations with a Killer, the John Wayne Gacy tapes, which is an actual documentary instead of a drama series. This means the potential is still there for a series focusing on Gacy in the dramatized format of Monster. Especially with this documentary reaching Netflix's top 10 when Monster was released, Netflix may be keen to take advantage of the clear interest in a Gacy series. There are plenty of other options for showrunners to explore, including those that Netflix has already made shows and movies based around, like Ted Bundy and Edmund Kemper. It could also be interesting to see Monster go further back in time and focus on serial killers from the more distant past. With there being plenty of serial killers to choose from, showrunners might decide to explore a more obscure case that viewers will be less familiar with than someone as notorious as Dahmer or Gacy. Whatever they choose to do, if the show is as well made and unnerving as Dahmer, it will likely reach similar levels of popularity. Who do you think Monster Season 2 will focus on? Were you a fan of the show's first season? Did you know much about Dahmer before watching the show, or was it your first time learning about the killer? How do you feel about the controversy surrounding the show? Do you think it's warranted? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. While you're down there, please don't forget to like and subscribe as well. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, we'll see you next time.